Hey, what's up, guys? So we're going to talk about mounting and positioning accessories on your AR-15. First thing we're going to talk about is slings. The most popular way to sling an AR-15 is with QD swivels like this. There's also the magpul pair clips like this, but at the end of the day, it's all personal preference. The most secure way to have the AR-15 slung over your body is to have your sling attached at both ends of the AR pistol or AR rifle. It's very secure, especially if you're climbing or running or something like that. I like to have it attached at the beginning of the rail if I'm actually trying to maneuver the rifle. That way I actually can maneuver the front end and have a little bit more control over it. Sometimes if I'm working a lot from the high ready position, I will take out the rear QD swivel and actually attach it to the end plate. So it's all personal preference. Just find out, what you like. I just like having different attachment points so I can move them back fairly quickly. When it comes to actually torquing down a sling attachment point in an M-lock slot like this, you want to be very careful with how much torque you add. For this rail and the pick lock section, PWS recommends 10 or 11 inch-pounds. That seems to be sufficient. I would be careful if you go over 15. Honestly, 15 inch-pounds would be about the limit I would want to torque down something on an M-lock slot. You got to remember that these M-lock rails are aluminum. A lot of them are 6061 aluminum, which is pretty soft. It just varies, rail to rail and whatever manufacturer you're getting it from. But you got to remember that the M-lock accessories, the screws and the washers are steel and they are harder than the aluminum. So you want to be very careful with how much torque you actually add to them. Now let's talk about mounting a flashlight and a pressure pad, or just a flashlight. Depending on if you're using a pressure pad or not will probably dictate what side of the rifle you want to mount it on. You can't have it without a pressure pad and just press the button right there, or if you feel more comfortable you can have it on the other side. It's all personal preference. There's no right or wrong side to have your flashlight on. If you're using a pressure pad, I prefer to have it mounted on the right side because obviously my left hand will be on the left side and sometimes that flashlight can get in the way a little bit. So if I'm using a pressure pad, I'd much rather have it on the right side. But if not, it doesn't really matter. It's totally up to you. You want to be careful how close you actually mount it to the muzzle, especially if you have a compensator. It can get pretty blasted and the concussive force can actually lessen the lifespan of your flashlight. So just be careful. This happens to be a flash hider, so personally I would just position it so it's right behind the first opening of that flash hider, maybe a little bit back further, just depending on the flashlight. If you're using a suppressor, however, you can get extensions and mount them as forward as you possibly can, as long as you're not in front of the suppressor. But just be careful, especially if you have a compensator. Another thing you want to be careful with is the screws you use to mount them with and where you actually mount it. You don't want it to actually touch your gas block. This is a piston AR, so the gas block is pretty large, but just be careful regardless of what you're mounting. Even on a DEI gun, you have to be very careful. You don't want those screws to be touching your gas block or your barrel, because you got to remember when you're firing this thing, it's going to flex and vibrate. You just won't be able to see it and pick it up with the naked eye, in real time. But just be careful. You want to have a little bit of space. So like these screws that come with the Arisaka mount, they are a little bit too long, and some positions they almost touch it. So what you can do is obviously shorten the screws, or you can just use shorter screws. So just be careful with that. I wanted to just let you guys know about that too as well. And you want to make sure you secure your wires when you're using a pressure pad. Most of the time when one of these things breaks, it's because a wire gets snagged and pulls and it shorts out or something like that. So be careful, retain your wires. You can use zip ties or ranger bands. If you use zip ties, be careful if you're zip tying around the pressure pad and going above the gas tube. Just be careful it's not touching. I do that all the time on Mark 18s and stuff, but That's another thing you want to be very careful with. And also use the high temperature rated zip ties. That will help a lot. But just remember, retain your wires, make sure they don't get snagged, and it'll be a lot better in the long run for you. Alright, now we're going to talk about mounting iron sights. Again, you do want to use a thread locker like this Permatex Blue 242 or Loctite thread locker Blue 242 removable. Very important. And generally with iron sights, you want to have the longest sight picture possible, so you want to put it all the way to the front and all the way to the rear. And make sure you mount your sights correctly so they flip up going forward towards the muzzle. Last thing you want to do is put them on backwards and get gear bulged and made fun of online. So just remember, put them on the correct way. For the torque spec, I will put them about 25 inch-pounds. That's generally where you want to be. Do not go more than 30. You never want to go more than 30 when you're mounting something to the top 1913 rail. Just like with this Unity tactical mount, about 25 inch-pounds, never more than 30. And once again, you do want to add witness marks. Just use a paint marker. That way, if they back out, you will be able to address it and see very quickly. I just use this Faber-Castell Pitt Artist Pen. It's basically a paint marker, so it comes off very easily, so don't worry about that. Just make sure you put them on appropriately. And when you are zeroing your iron sights, if you're using an optic, you want to put on your optic and then zero them through the optic. You got to remember, you're looking at your front sight through a piece of shaped glass, so it will look a little bit different, and if you take your optic off, your zero will change. So if you're going to run an optic with backup sights, zero your iron sights through the optic. When mounting an optic riser, or iron sights, as you're mounting it, you want to loosen it up, put it on top of your rail, and you want to push down and forward at the same time, and then torque it down to spec. That's very important because you want it all the way snugged up forward, so when the rifle AR pistol recoils, that sight will not move. If it is not snugged up forward as the gun recoils, it can push the sight forward, so that's very important. Also add witness marks on your mounts, optics, add Loctite, stuff like that. And when you mount an optic on an AR15, you do not want to mount it to the rail. You want to mount it off the upper receiver. If you mount it to the rail, it can lose zero a lot easier. Plus, when you mount it to the upper, your barrel is also mounted to that upper. So it makes a lot more sense to actually just mount it on your upper receiver. Generally, with a red dot, I want it right above that mag well. If you have something like an ACOG or an lpvo and the eye relief isn't as good, you can push it back a little bit further. Alright guys, now that I got everything mounted and secured on the AR pistol, I wanted to show you guys how I positioned everything, starting with the light. Like I said, you want to be careful where you position your light so it doesn't get blasted too much. If you're using a compensator, you want to be very careful. This is a flash hider, and I could position it another half slot forward if I wanted to, but it's fine where it is for now. I've used this burn-proof gear wrap to help secure my pressure pad and my wires, and I've also used one ranger band. You just want to be careful, make sure your wires are secured so they don't get snagged and you don't break or damage your pressure pad. The optic and optic riser are mounted directly over my mag well. Just remember, like I said, when you install it, push down and push forward, because if you don't do that under recoil, it could move your optic or your riser and you can lose zero. The same goes for the sights. Remember, orient your sights the correct way so they are facing forward and flip up towards the muzzle so you don't get made fun of. Also, in regards to slings, if you're right-handed, when you sling your weapon, you want to sling it over the left side of your body. So put your left arm in first and then sling it over your head. I've seen people do it over the right side of their body and they put their right arm in. It'll be a lot harder to maneuver the rifle, so do it over the left side. And when you attach the sling to your brace or stock, if you are right-handed, do it on the right side of the stock. If you're left-handed, do everything I said in the reverse. Regarding torque specs on M-LOK rails, It's kind of all over the place. I hear anywhere from 10 inch-pounds all the way up to 35 inch-pounds. And I'm just going to be honest with you, if you torque something down to 35 inch-pounds on an M-LOK slot, you very well might badly damage or mar your rail. The washers on the M-LOK accessories are steel, and your rail is aluminum. So aluminum is a lot softer. Just use some common sense with everything. But that's going to be it. Thanks everyone for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video. You almost thought I forgot. Most important accessory in this video. Offset armor with your tall boy eotech. You always gotta remember, piss off the trolls, and this sure does it best. See you guys in the next one.